Entitled woman struck Britsh royal guard presuming he'd stay quiet. What followed left everyone stunned. It was a bright, crisp afternoon in London, the kind of day when the city seemed alive with energy. The sun reflected off the glass windows of the nearby buildings, and the air carried the distant hum of double-decker buses and the chatter of excited tourists. Buckingham Palace, with its grand facade and sprawling gardens, stood proudly at the end of the street. People had gathered there, cameras in hand, eager to catch a glimpse of the ceremonial guards who had become an iconic symbol of British tradition. Families, couples, and solo travelers wandered around the palace gates, some pointing at the guards, some taking selfies, and some simply watching in awe at the statuesque figures who stood with absolute stillness, their red coats bright under the sunlight and their tall bearskin hats casting long shadows on the cobblestones. Among the crowd was a woman who stood out, not because of her dress or appearance, but because of the air she carried. She walked with a sense of entitlement, her head held high, a slight smirk on her face as if the world should instantly bend to her wishes. Her movements were sharp, decisive, and impatient. She was clearly someone who believed that rules were suggestions meant for others, and that she could navigate any situation as she pleased. As she approached the guards, it was obvious she saw them not as disciplined professionals, but as objects to be tested, people to be challenged. The royal guard she approached stood perfectly still, as always, his posture flawless and his gaze forward. He did not move, not even when a pigeon landed nearby or when a tourist brushed against him accidentally. His uniform was impeccable. The red coat was pristine, the gold buttons gleaming, and the black bearskin hat tall and impressive. To the casual observer, he seemed almost robotic in his precision. But behind his stillness was a trained mind, fully aware of every movement, every sound around him, and every potential disturbance that might arise. He was the picture of discipline, a living symbol of centuries-old tradition, and he carried his duty with pride. The woman paused for a moment, observing him. She tilted her head slightly, as if analyzing a puzzle she intended to solve in her own favor. Then, with a sudden motion, she jabbed him sharply in the arm. It was not an accidental brush or a playful poke. It was deliberate, assertive, and designed to provoke a reaction. She expected him to flinch, to react, or at the very least, to acknowledge her boldness. She expected him to stay silent, to follow the unwritten rule of politeness she assumed existed. The crowd gasped. People nearby turned their heads, some in shock, some in curiosity. No one could believe what they had just seen. A woman had dared to touch a royal guard, a figure known worldwide for discipline and poise, and she had done it with full awareness. Whispers rippled through the crowd, questions forming in every mind. Would he move? Would he speak? Or would he simply continue standing there, pretending nothing had happened? The tension in the air was almost tangible. For a moment, it seemed as though time slowed. The birds in the nearby trees paused their songs, and the bustling sounds of the city felt distant, as if the entire world had focused on that single moment. The woman's face changed slightly, a flicker of confusion and frustration crossing her features as she realized that her expected reaction, a flinch, a stumble, or a surprised word, did not come. The guard remained perfectly still, his expression unreadable, his gaze forward. It was as if her action had no effect, as if she had jabbed at air rather than a human being. The people around them began to murmur more loudly. Some whispered, "Can you believe she did that?" Others said, "He's not even moving." A few more adventurous souls raised their phones, capturing the scene from different angles, sensing that something unusual, and perhaps historic, was happening right in front of them. Even the children watching seemed to sense the weight of the moment. They tilted their heads and held their breaths, unsure whether to laugh, gasp, or stay silent. The woman's frustration grew. She had come prepared to test boundaries, to assert her sense of entitlement, and perhaps to provoke laughter or fear. But instead, she was met with calm, unshakable composure. Her smirk faded slightly, replaced by a frown. She jabbed again, harder this time, expecting a reaction. Still nothing. The guard remained as steady as a statue, seemingly impervious to her provocations. What she did not realize was that this guard, like all his colleagues, had undergone years of training, not just in maintaining posture and performing ceremonial duties, but in handling unexpected situations with discretion and professionalism. He was aware of the crowd, aware of her movements, and aware that reacting emotionally could escalate a situation unnecessarily. But he also knew that security protocols were in place for moments exactly like this. He had a network of support behind him, a team ready to intervene if needed. And yet, he chose to maintain the appearance of calm, knowing that the right response was not in reaction, but in control. The crowd's attention had shifted completely to the interaction. No longer were they admiring the guard's precision or the palace's grandeur. They were now captivated by the drama unfolding before them. Some tourists whispered to each other, trying to guess what would happen next. Others, more daring, edged closer to get a better view, their phones ready to capture what they assumed would be an interesting story to tell friends and family. The woman, still unaware of how much attention she had drawn, jabbed once more, now with a hint of desperation in her movement. And still, the guard did not move. His face remained impassive, his body unchanged. The crowd's murmurs grew louder, a mix of admiration and disbelief. People began to comment quietly, noting how impressive his discipline was. Some compared him to statues they had seen in museums, frozen in time yet undeniably commanding. Others noted the contrast between the woman's frantic, impatient movements and his unshakable stillness. It was a lesson in patience, restraint, and dignity, all unfolding in real time. The woman finally stepped back, her confidence shaken. She had expected the guard to respond, to falter, or at least to acknowledge her audacity. Instead, she faced silence and composure. Around her, the crowd's whispers turned to subtle applause, not loud enough to disrupt the solemnity of the palace setting, but enough to mark their appreciation for the guard's professionalism. Cameras clicked, videos were recorded, and the moment was cemented in memory as something remarkable, something unexpected, and something that defied ordinary tourist encounters. Even as she turned to leave, she could feel the eyes of the crowd on her. The whispers followed her, questioning her actions, judging her boldness, and marveling at the guard's poise. It was a public lesson that entitlement could backfire, and that respect was not something one could demand through audacity or force. It had to be earned or at least acknowledged. Meanwhile, the guard resumed his stance, motionless once more, perfectly composed, the embodiment of centuries of tradition and discipline. And for the people who had witnessed it, the incident was more than a simple tourist disturbance. It became a story they would tell again and again, of a woman who thought rules did not apply to her, and a guard who showed, in quiet and unwavering strength, that dignity and professionalism are powerful forces in any situation. It was a moment that would linger in the minds of those who saw it, a story of patience, control, and the unexpected drama of everyday life in one of the world's most famous landmarks. The air around Buckingham Palace was electric, charged with curiosity and disbelief. After the woman's unexpected jabs at the royal guard, the crowd had grown silent, leaning in as if trying to catch every detail of the unfolding scene. Tourists whispered to one another, exchanging glances that said, without words, "Did that just happen?" Children clung to their parents' hands, some pointing with wide eyes at the woman and the guard, unsure whether to laugh, gasp, or simply stay quiet. The bright sun shone down, reflecting off the palace gates and casting long shadows on the cobblestones, but it could not warm the tense atmosphere that now enveloped the area. The guard remained as still as ever, his posture perfect, his eyes straight ahead and his expression unreadable. To the casual observer, he looked like a statue, a man carved from stone and placed there to endure any disturbance. But behind his calm exterior was a mind working quickly and carefully. He had been trained for years to handle unexpected events without letting emotion interfere with duty. His discipline was not just in the way he stood, it was in the way he thought, in the way he controlled himself, and in the way he projected authority without a single movement. The woman, sensing that her previous attempts had failed to provoke a reaction, took a step back. She furrowed her brow, her mouth forming a thin line of frustration. She had assumed that the guards, bound by tradition and rigid rules, would either flinch or say something to defend themselves. She had believed that their silence was a weakness, an opportunity to assert her dominance. Now, confronted with unwavering composure, she was faced with something she had not anticipated: restraint. It was a restraint that was not weakness but power. Around them, the crowd had begun to whisper more audibly. Some onlookers were clearly impressed by the guard's calm, while others were amazed by the audacity of the woman. Phones were lifted, videos were recorded, and social media feeds were prepared to capture what seemed to be an unusual moment in an otherwise ordinary day. The whispers grew into small conversations. "Look at him," one tourist murmured. "He hasn't even blinked." "Incredible," another voice replied. "I think she's going to regret that." Children tilted their heads, their small voices asking questions like, "Why isn't he moving? And why did she do that?" Their parents tried to answer, some struggling to explain in simple words why the guard did not react. The woman, feeling the weight of the audience's attention, tried again. She jabbed lightly at the guard's arm once more, perhaps hoping that a repeated action would finally get a response. But once again, the guard did not move. He did not flinch, he did not look at her, and he did not even blink noticeably. The quiet precision of his discipline was a stark contrast to her increasingly frantic movements. The difference could not have been more clear. One person was controlled, confident, and steady, while the other was impulsive, frustrated, and increasingly aware that her actions had not had the effect she had imagined. What the crowd may not have realized was that the guard had subtly activated a set of internal security protocols. Though he remained motionless, he had alerted nearby colleagues, and they were now discreetly moving into positions to respond if necessary. Every gesture he made was calculated. Every movement, or lack thereof, was part of a careful plan to maintain order. To the outside world, it looked like silence and patience, but in reality, it was an active and deliberate exercise of authority. The woman's confusion grew. She had expected the guard to respond with either surprise or anger. She had assumed that the centuries-old ceremony of the guards was just for show, a display of uniforms and rigid posture, without any real ability to handle confrontation. Now she was learning in a very public way that her assumptions were mistaken. The guard's stillness spoke louder than words ever could. It said, "I am in control, and your actions cannot unsettle me." The crowd felt it too, a quiet awe spreading among the tourists as they began to realize the depth of the guard's discipline. Nearby, another guard, stationed just a few steps away, shifted slightly, always careful to keep the movement subtle. He did not want to draw attention or escalate the situation unnecessarily, but he was prepared. Others around the palace gates began to pay attention as well, forming a silent network of vigilance. The palace itself, with its long history of ceremony, authority, and tradition, seemed to watch silently over the scene, reinforcing the impression that this was not just a man standing still. It was an institution asserting its strength. Meanwhile, the woman tried to regain control of the moment. She stepped closer, her movements sharper and more deliberate. She tried again, poking at his arm with slightly more force, and this time she muttered under her breath, a mix of disbelief and irritation. The crowd noticed, some murmuring in sympathy for the guard, others shaking their heads at her audacity. She clearly did not understand the situation fully. She had expected a simple reaction, not a demonstration of unshakable composure. The guard's response, or lack thereof, began to draw admiration from the crowd. People whispered about how difficult it must be to remain perfectly still for so long, not just physically, but mentally. They spoke of the years of training it must have taken to achieve such control. "I could never do that," someone said quietly, shaking their head. "He must have nerves of steel." Others nodded in agreement, noting the contrast between the woman's impatience and the guard's quiet authority. It became clear that she had misjudged not just the man, but the entire tradition he represented. Time seemed to stretch. The woman jabbed once more, now with a hint of desperation creeping into her movements. She glanced around, seeing the cameras and the watching faces, realizing that people were not impressed by her boldness, but by the guard's composure. The silence had turned into a statement, louder than any words could be. Respect is not demanded, it is earned, or it is acknowledged quietly by those with the strength to remain calm. As she hesitated, the guard's eyes remained fixed straight ahead. His focus was absolute, not on the woman, not on the crowd, but on the duty he had been entrusted with. Every muscle in his body was trained to endure, every thought disciplined to maintain order, and every gesture, though seemingly simple, calculated to prevent escalation. He was a living symbol of restraint, a reminder that power often lies not in reaction, but in quiet control. The crowd had begun to shift, a subtle sense of collective respect settling over them. They realized that this was not a simple tourist disturbance. It was a lesson in patience, dignity, and professionalism. Phones continued to record, videos would later circulate online, but in that moment the audience experienced something more immediate and profound. A real-life demonstration of discipline, courage, and calm under pressure. Even the children began to understand, in their own way. Some mimicked the guard's stillness, others whispered to their parents, asking questions about why the woman had acted the way she did. The parents tried to explain in simple words that sometimes people test limits, that sometimes people act without thinking, and that sometimes the strongest response is quiet and calm. The lesson was unfolding in front of them, vivid, clear, and unforgettable. The woman finally stepped back, her energy spent and her confidence shaken. She looked around, noticing for the first time the crowd's attention fully on her, the cameras capturing every detail, and the subtle, yet unmistakable, signs of admiration directed toward the guard. She realized too late that her actions had failed to produce the reaction she had anticipated. Instead, she had become part of a public lesson, a moment remembered not for her boldness, but for the guard's unwavering composure. As she moved away, the guard maintained his posture, his gaze forward and his expression unreadable. He did not celebrate, did not acknowledge, and did not react. To the world, he was a symbol of dignity and restraint, and to those watching, he had set an example that would remain in memory long after the woman had disappeared into the crowd. The palace, the crowd, and the ceremonial tradition all seemed to stand in quiet agreement. Respect, patience, and professionalism could overcome even the most unexpected challenges. For the people who witnessed it, the incident was no longer just about a woman and a guard. It became a story of human behavior, of assumptions and misjudgments, of the power of calm in a world that often rewards the loud and the impulsive. It was a reminder that discipline is not just a requirement of a uniform, but a way of living, and that sometimes the most powerful response is the one that is quiet, controlled, and completely unshaken. The moment at Buckingham Palace did not stay quiet for long. Within minutes, tourists began sharing videos on their phones, uploading short clips to social media platforms. The sight of a woman striking a royal guard and receiving no response immediately captured attention. People around the world were drawn to the unusual scene. The contrast between her aggressive behavior and the guard's absolute calm was striking. Some posts were shared with captions of disbelief, others with admiration for the guard's discipline. Within hours, the incident had spread far beyond the cobblestone streets of London, reaching people who had never been to the palace but felt connected to the story through their screens. News outlets quickly picked up the videos. Headlines appeared online describing the unusual confrontation. Tourist strikes Buckingham Palace guard. He remains unmoved, or royal guard shows incredible restraint after being struck. The story was covered by international media, highlighting both the audacity of the woman and the professionalism of the guard. Editors emphasized the crowd's reaction, the calmness of the soldier, and the unexpected lesson in discipline and dignity. For readers, it was more than a tourist disturbance. It was a story that highlighted the remarkable training and control that the ceremonial guards maintained, even under surprising circumstances. Social media exploded with reactions. Some viewers expressed disbelief at the woman's actions. "Who thinks it's okay to strike a guard?" one person wrote. "Unbelievable," another commented. Others focused on the guard's composure. "He's incredible," one tweet read. "I could never stay that calm." Respect. People began comparing the event to lessons in patience and restraint, sharing the story as a moral example. It quickly became clear that the incident had struck a chord, sparking conversations about respect, entitlement, and self-control in public spaces. Many people revisited their own experiences. Parents shared the story with their children, explaining why the guard's calmness was admirable and why it was important to respect rules and traditions. Teachers discussed it in classrooms as an example of how restraint and professionalism can turn a challenging situation into a lesson for everyone. Even local businesses near Buckingham Palace noticed an increase in tourists wanting to witness the guards in person, hoping to see firsthand the discipline that had captivated the world. As the story spread, reactions became more varied and creative. Some people turned it into light-hearted memes, exaggerating the woman's boldness or celebrating the guard's calm. Others used the story to reflect on human behavior. Commentators wrote about the psychology behind entitlement, the social expectations of decorum, and the consequences of impulsive actions. Analysts praised the guard's ability to maintain control, noting that true strength often comes from patience rather than confrontation. The incident became a small cultural phenomenon, a moment that resonated with audiences far beyond the palace gates. Meanwhile, the woman herself became the subject of discussion. Though her identity remained mostly private, her actions were replayed in countless clips and retellings. People criticized her for misjudging the situation and for underestimating the professionalism of the royal guards. Some expressed sympathy, suggesting that she may not have intended to cause trouble, while many others saw the moment as a public lesson about humility and understanding boundaries. Regardless, she had unwittingly become part of a story that would be remembered and shared for a long time. In the midst of all the online attention, the royal guard remained steadfastly anonymous in the public eye. Most media coverage focused on his actions, not his identity. He became a symbol, a reminder of patience, composure, and the quiet authority of tradition. Social media users speculated about his training, imagining the years of dedication it must take to stand still for hours and maintain such discipline even when provoked. Many wrote heartfelt messages praising him, not just for standing still, but for demonstrating that true power lies in control and calmness. The incident also inspired deeper discussions about respect and human behavior in public spaces. Articles and opinion pieces explored how people often underestimate the importance of rules and boundaries, how entitlement can cloud judgment, and how the ability to remain calm in the face of provocation can have a powerful influence on those around us. For many readers, the story was more than entertainment. It was a reflection on society and how small moments can teach big lessons. The world had witnessed a simple action, a jab, a calm response, and recognized the importance of respect and restraint. Tourists visiting Buckingham Palace after the event were more cautious. Some laughed softly at the memory of the woman and her failed attempt to provoke the guard. Others observed the guards more closely, appreciating not just their appearance but their dedication, skill, and the invisible rules that guided their actions. Guides began sharing the story with visitors, describing it as an example of the discipline and professionalism required of ceremonial guards. The incident became part of the narrative that enriched the experience of visiting the palace, making it more than just a tour but a lesson in tradition and respect. Even in private conversations, the story persisted. People recounted it at family dinners, workplace meetings, and casual gatherings with friends. The narrative took on life beyond the video clips and news articles. It was told again and again, emphasizing different aspects: the audacity of the woman, the crowd's reactions, or the guard's remarkable calm. In each retelling, the message remained the same. Composure and discipline can turn an unexpected challenge into a moment of respect and admiration. The woman, watching from afar as the story spread online, began to feel the consequences of her actions. She saw people criticizing her behavior, sharing the video widely, and praising the guard's restraint. Her attempt to assert dominance had instead highlighted her impulsiveness and lack of awareness. It was a lesson in humility that reached far beyond the palace, and she could not ignore the overwhelming attention she had drawn. The incident, once a fleeting act in a public space, had transformed into a moment with a global audience. Meanwhile, the royal guard returned to his duties with quiet professionalism. He received no public fanfare, no awards in the streets, and no dramatic recognition, yet he remained a central figure in the story that had captivated the world. For him, the lesson was simple: stay true to one's duties, maintain composure, and let actions speak louder than words. In a world that often rewards noise and aggression, his silent demonstration of restraint had created a lasting impression, one that reminded everyone that discipline and calm can leave a more powerful impact than anger or reaction. The story continued to circulate, showing how small, everyday events can take on larger meanings when viewed through the lens of human behavior. It became a case study in restraint, a viral lesson on patience, and an example of how professionalism can influence public perception. Across cities and countries, people discussed it in schools, workplaces, and homes, reflecting on the importance of respect, composure, and the surprising lessons that ordinary moments can teach. In the weeks following the incident, the guard became a symbol in the collective imagination. Even without revealing his identity, people recognized him as a representative of tradition, discipline, and human strength. The woman's attempt to disrupt that image only reinforced it. Her actions, while bold, had backfired spectacularly. Instead of undermining authority, she had highlighted the very qualities she hoped to challenge. The guard's silence became more than an act of patience. It became a lesson in dignity, proving that true power does not need to shout or strike back. It simply needs to endure and remain steady. The incident also prompted reflection among law enforcement and public safety officials. Analysts examined how well-trained personnel can manage unexpected provocations while maintaining public safety. The viral nature of the event highlighted the modern reality of public behavior in the age of social media, where a single moment can be broadcast to millions within minutes. For experts, the story was a real-world example of professionalism, training, and the careful balance between authority and restraint. And so, the story of the woman and the royal guard became more than just a moment in front of Buckingham Palace. It became a story told and retold, a lesson in patience, dignity, and the surprising ways that ordinary actions can resonate with extraordinary impact. The world watched as a single act of audacity met unwavering calm, and in that meeting, an unexpected truth became clear. Respect, self-control, and professionalism leave a mark far greater than anger, impulse, or entitlement ever could. The viral spread of the incident at Buckingham Palace did not go unnoticed by authorities. Within hours of the videos circulating online, palace security officials had reviewed the footage carefully. They were used to dealing with crowds of tourists every day, but this situation was different. Here was a person who had intentionally struck a royal guard, someone whose actions, while not physically dangerous, had violated the rules and decorum expected in a high-security public space. The security team quickly began documenting the event, noting the time, location, and the actions of the woman, and they started working to identify her. Meanwhile, the woman continued to move through the crowd, trying to act as though nothing had happened. But she could feel the growing attention from onlookers. People were pointing, some whispering, some shaking their heads in disbelief. The cameras and phones still recorded her every movement, capturing the aftermath of her impulsive actions. She could no longer ignore the reality of the situation. She had done something bold, perhaps even shocking, but it had not produced the results she had hoped for. Instead, it had made her the subject of worldwide attention and criticism. Palace security, together with local authorities, identified her within a few hours using the video footage and witness statements. They contacted the local police to take the next steps. Soon, she was asked to come in for questioning. At first, she was incredulous, almost refusing to believe that the situation had escalated to this level. It was just a poke, she told herself. But as the calls from authorities became more formal, the reality began to sink in. Her impulsive action had consequences, and those consequences were now unavoidable. When she arrived at the police station, she was met with professionalism. Officers explained to her calmly what had occurred, detailing the rules that had been violated and the seriousness of the offense. She listened, slowly realizing that striking a royal guard was not a trivial matter, even if her intentions had been playful or impulsive. The calm, measured tone of the officers contrasted with her rising anxiety. She had expected to get away with it, perhaps laugh it off, or simply leave unnoticed. Instead, she was faced with official consequences and a clear explanation of why her behavior had been unacceptable. As she reflected on her actions during questioning, a sense of embarrassment and regret began to wash over her. She realized that her assumptions about the guards and their supposed passivity had been completely wrong. The royal guard she had struck had shown a level of discipline and professionalism that far exceeded anything she had expected. He had not reacted with anger or even visible discomfort. Instead, he had maintained perfect composure, showing restraint that highlighted the stark contrast with her impulsive behavior. In that moment, she understood just how foolish her actions had been. Authorities decided to issue a formal reprimand. While the situation did not require imprisonment or heavy legal penalties, it was important to make clear that her behavior was unacceptable. She was warned that any further actions of this nature could result in more serious consequences. The formal notice emphasized respect, decorum, and the importance of following rules in public spaces, particularly in locations of historical and cultural significance such as Buckingham Palace. The message was firm, yet fair, designed not to punish excessively, but to ensure that she understood the gravity of her behavior. News of the reprimand quickly spread through the media. Journalists reported that the woman had been officially contacted by authorities and had received a warning. The focus of these reports, however, remained on the royal guard's exemplary behavior. People praised the guard for his ability to maintain composure under unexpected provocation, highlighting the contrast between the impulsive actions of the woman and the measured response of the soldier. Editorials praised the professionalism of the palace staff and law enforcement, noting how quickly and efficiently they had handled the situation. For the woman, the attention brought a new kind of discomfort. The viral videos continued to circulate online, with people commenting on her behavior and sharing their opinions. Memes, reactions, and discussions kept her actions in the public eye. She could no longer move through her daily life without encountering mentions of the incident on social media, in news articles, or in conversations. Her impulsive moment had become an unforgettable lesson in public behavior, responsibility, and the consequences of underestimating authority. During this time, she began to reflect deeply on her actions. She realized that her sense of entitlement had clouded her judgment. She had assumed that her boldness would allow her to act without consequence, that the guard's silence was a weakness to exploit. But the reality was very different. The guard's silence had been a demonstration of strength, restraint, and control. The consequences she now faced were a direct result of her misjudgment, and the experience left her humbled and more aware of her actions. Even friends and family, who initially heard about the incident through social media, offered their opinions. Some expressed concern, reminding her of the importance of respecting others and following social norms. Others discussed the impressive professionalism of the guard, noting that his calm demeanor in such a stressful moment was remarkable. For the woman, these conversations added to her growing understanding that she had miscalculated not only the situation, but the character of the individuals she had confronted. At Buckingham Palace, the incident remained a topic of discussion among staff and visitors alike. Security officers reviewed procedures, noting how well the situation had been handled. Guards discussed the importance of maintaining composure under provocation, sharing the story as an example for new recruits. Visitors who witnessed the event recounted it in detail to friends, family, and tour guides, emphasizing how the guard's restraint had turned a moment of potential conflict into a lesson in professionalism. Over time, the woman accepted that her actions had been wrong. She understood that striking the guard, even lightly, had violated social norms and rules of respect. She realized that she had been caught up in her own assumptions and had failed to consider the consequences of her behavior. Her public embarrassment, combined with the formal reprimand and the global attention, provided a stark but necessary reminder that actions, even seemingly small ones, carry consequences. The story of the incident continued to circulate online, but the narrative shifted slightly. Instead of focusing solely on the woman's audacity, people highlighted the guard's composure and professionalism. The lesson was clear. Impulsive actions might gain attention temporarily, but true respect is earned through discipline and restraint. The woman became a cautionary tale, but the guard became a symbol of dignity and self-control, demonstrating how patience and professionalism can turn a challenging situation into a moment of admiration. Even as the days passed, the woman could not escape the consequences of her actions. She remained aware of how widely the videos had spread and how her behavior had been received by people around the world. The incident had altered her perception of public behavior, boundaries, and responsibility. She began to approach public spaces differently, more carefully, and with a new understanding that actions have consequences and that authority and tradition should be respected. In the end, the consequences for the woman extended beyond the formal reprimand. She had learned a lesson in humility, respect, and awareness. Her impulsive behavior had been met with quiet strength. a reminder that composure and professionalism often have more impact than anger or aggression. The experience left her more thoughtful, more cautious, and more aware of the broader social context in which her actions occurred. And while she reflected on her actions, the royal guard returned to his duties as always. Unshaken, disciplined, and composed, he continued to stand as a symbol of tradition and professionalism. The story of the incident would be remembered not for the woman's impulsive behavior, but for the guard's unwavering composure and the lesson it provided to the public. His actions had transformed a single moment of audacity into a global reminder of the power of restraint and the importance of respect. After the incident at Buckingham Palace and the formal reprimand of the woman, life slowly returned to normal around the palace gates. Tourists continued to gather, snapping photos, watching the guards, and enjoying the history of the iconic landmark. Yet, even as the crowds moved on, the story of that day lingered in conversations, online feeds, and the minds of those who had witnessed it. What had seemed like a fleeting moment had become much more than that. It had transformed into a lesson on discipline, composure, and respect, one that would be remembered and retold for years to come. The royal guard, as always, continued his duties without fanfare. To the casual visitor, he appeared no different than any other day, standing tall in his bright red coat and bearskin hat, facing forward with the same perfect posture. But behind his calm demeanor was an understanding that his actions that day had resonated far beyond the palace gates. The restraint he had shown was quietly extraordinary, and it had captured the attention of millions of people around the world. The power of his silence and discipline had demonstrated a universal truth. Sometimes, the strongest response is no response at all. The woman, reflecting on the incident, carried her own lessons with her. Though the formal reprimand was temporary, the public attention had left a lasting impression. She realized that her sense of entitlement and impulsiveness had led to embarrassment, criticism, and personal reflection. She began to understand the importance of respecting boundaries, appreciating the rules that protect public spaces, and considering the impact of her actions on others. In a way, the incident became a turning point in her understanding of behavior, consequence, and social awareness. The public, too, continued to reflect on the story. Social media remained filled with discussions and commentary long after the event itself. People debated why the guard's composure had been so impressive, how the woman's assumptions had led her astray, and what lessons could be drawn from the encounter. Schools used the story to teach children about respect and patience. Parents shared it as a cautionary tale, and even workplace discussions referenced it as an example of professionalism under pressure. The incident had transcended its initial context, becoming a story that offered meaningful lessons to a wide audience. In many ways, the incident highlighted the contrast between impulsive behavior and thoughtful composure. The woman's actions, though bold, were fleeting and ultimately ineffective. The guard's calm response, however, had a lasting impact, demonstrating that restraint, discipline, and professionalism leave a far greater impression than sudden aggression or bravado. Observers around the world began to see the value in patience, in choosing to respond thoughtfully rather than reacting impulsively. The story became a symbol of how inner strength, quiet control, and adherence to duty can influence public perception more than loud or aggressive behavior ever could. Tourists visiting Buckingham Palace in the weeks and months following the incident often asked guides about the story. Guides, in turn, shared the events as an example of the importance of respect and the remarkable training of the royal guards. Visitors were reminded that the guards were not just ceremonial figures. They represented centuries of tradition, discipline, and responsibility. The story enhanced the experience of visiting the palace, turning it into more than a sightseeing trip. It became a lesson in human behavior, professionalism, and the power of calm. For the woman, the story was a reminder she could not ignore. She had entered the situation expecting minimal consequences, perhaps imagining she would be laughed off or dismissed. Instead, she found herself at the center of global attention, facing criticism, embarrassment, and official action. It was a humbling experience, one that reshaped her understanding of personal responsibility and the importance of following social norms. Over time, she reflected on what had happened, realizing that her impulsive behavior had been an opportunity to learn, to grow, and to approach the world with more respect and thoughtfulness. The guard's actions, while simple in appearance, became a model for behavior in public life. Observers noted that his calmness was not passive. It was deliberate, controlled, and based on years of training and discipline. He had demonstrated that composure in the face of provocation could turn an uncomfortable moment into a powerful display of integrity and strength. In an age where social media can amplify every action, the guard's quiet professionalism offered a stark contrast to impulsive reactions, showing that patience and thoughtfulness carry lasting value. Media outlets revisited the story in retrospectives, highlighting its lessons for modern society. Commentators reflected on how quickly small actions can become global narratives, how impulsive behavior can be magnified in the age of social media, and how discipline and professionalism can inspire admiration across cultures. The story became a touchstone for discussions about respect, authority, and human behavior, demonstrating that even brief encounters can leave long-lasting impressions when handled with composure and intelligence. Schools and community groups used the incident as a teaching tool. Children learned about the importance of respecting authority, following rules, and thinking before acting. Teachers explained how impulsive decisions, even in seemingly minor situations, can have unexpected consequences. Parents discussed the event with their children, emphasizing that respect for others is not optional, and that patience and self-control are important skills in everyday life. The story became an educational resource, illustrating lessons that extended far beyond the gates of Buckingham Palace. As time passed, the woman's personal reflection deepened. She realized that the incident had changed her understanding of public behavior, authority, and accountability. What had begun as a moment of impulsive defiance had become a meaningful lesson in humility, respect, and self-awareness. She understood that while her actions could not be erased, the experience offered an opportunity to grow, to recognize the power of composure, and to approach future situations with greater thoughtfulness. The royal guard continued his duties without seeking recognition or praise. For him, the incident was just one of many moments in which discipline and professionalism were required. Yet, the impact of his actions was undeniable. Observers remembered his calmness, admired his restraint, and shared the story widely. He had demonstrated that respect, integrity, and composure have a power that extends beyond the immediate moment, influencing public perception and providing a lasting example for people of all ages. The incident also became a reminder of the value of training, preparation, and understanding one's role. The guard's ability to maintain composure was not accidental. It was the result of years of practice, discipline, and dedication. Observers recognized that his restraint was a form of strength, one that required both mental and physical control. In a world where quick reactions are often celebrated, the story highlighted that true strength often comes from patience, planning, and measured responses. In the end, the story of the woman and the royal guard left a lasting legacy. It became more than a viral video or a news story. It became a lesson in behavior, respect, and professionalism. People continued to share the story, reflect on its meaning, and apply its lessons to their own lives. The woman, having learned her own personal lesson, moved forward with a greater understanding of responsibility and the consequences of her actions. The guard, ever composed, continued his duties, embodying the timeless values of discipline, patience, and integrity. The crowd that had witnessed the incident on that bright London afternoon remained part of the story as well. Tourists and passers-by shared their experiences with friends and family, describing not just what they had seen, but what they had learned. They spoke of the surprising tension, the calm authority of the guard, and the lessons in respect and patience that had unfolded before their eyes. The event became part of the cultural memory of Buckingham Palace, a reminder that even small, unexpected moments can teach big lessons. Ultimately, the incident served as a timeless reminder. Impulsive actions may gain temporary attention, but calmness, discipline, and professionalism leave lasting impressions. Respect cannot be demanded through force or audacity. It is recognized when met with restraint and dignity. The story of the woman and the royal guard became a narrative that extended far beyond a single afternoon, offering lessons in patience, humility, and the quiet power of composure to audiences around the world.